Hi, welcome to Onkaparinga Libraries online author talk today with Laura Greaves. My name is Angela Burney and I will be hosting this event with Jacinta. Welcome, Jacinta.
Hello, how are you all?
Before I introduce Laura, I just wanted to say the book, Extraordinary Old Dogs, if you wanted to put that book on hold, you can do so through your local library. You can come in person, you can phone us, or you can do it online. Also, the book is available through Dimmicks at Glenelg, so they're a fantastic supporter for us. They stock all of the books from our author talks, so you can head on down to there or go online as well. If you want to ask any questions of Laura, you can do that through the Q&A button, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, you can scroll your mouse at the bottom and it'll come up. So ask all your questions in the Q&A button. That would be really good. I think that's all I had to say for now. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I am going to warmly introduce Laura. Thank you for joining us today, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's right. I've read your book and I just read, when we spoke earlier, I just realised it was only just being launched today, published. So it's available from today, is it?
Yes, today is the official publication day. So rush to your bookshop and buy it, or to your library and borrow it.
That's excellent. I don't think we've ever done a author talk with a book that's being released on the day of the talk. So that's quite exciting for us.
And for me too.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave you in Laura's hands for a little while she talks a bit about her process and about her love of dogs and her new book. Thank you.
So much. Appreciate it. Well, first of all, let me show you the book. If you haven't seen it, this is Extraordinary Old Dogs, uplifting true tales of remarkable seniors. So yes, thank you so much to Onkaparinga Libraries for inviting me along today to have a chat to you all. I'm coming to you from the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, where it is currently 38 degrees and really quite unpleasant. And also the trees are screaming because we're in the midst of a crazy cicada plague. So it's noisy and it's hot, and I'm very grateful to be inside in the air conditioning talking about dogs. So one thing that people ask me a lot, actually before I get onto the book, I can't see who's watching, but I imagine I probably know some of you. So hi, Mum, if you're watching. And hello to friends and family, if some of you are tuning in. I am actually from Adelaide originally, although I've been away from South Australia now almost as long as I lived there, which is a bit of a crazy thought. But yes, Adelaide born and raised, and very familiar with the Onkaparinga region. I actually spent the early part of my childhood in Happy Valley and went to Happy Valley Primary School, and my grandparents lived in Port Noarlunga, so I spent a lot of time down south and enjoying the beaches and everything down there. So yes, it's nice to be back in Adelaide, albeit virtually today. Yes, so as I was going to say, a lot of people have asked me what inspired me to write a book about senior dogs in particular. So this is actually my 9th book. And it's my 6th book about dogs. I've also published 3 novels. The novels also feature dogs pretty heavily, but they're more supporting characters, extras, if you like, rather than they're not specifically about dogs. But 6 of my books are non-fiction collections of true stories about amazing dogs. And Extraordinary Old Dogs was inspired by one of my dogs. So I've got 3 dogs. Their names are Tex, Delilah, and Coco. Tex and Delilah are both seniors. Tex just turned 13 and Delilah just turned 10. Coco is an adult, but we're not exactly sure how old she was because she was a stray and we adopted her from our local RSPCA shelter. We think she's probably about 5. She's a Kelpie cross, so she seems a lot younger because they have so much energy. But yes, it was Tex, my old boy, my 13-year-old, who inspired this book, because Tex he's always been an old man, really. He's always had an old soul. He's had a bit of grumpy old man attitude since he was a 12-week-old puppy. So his body's just kind of caught up with him. He's now physically old as well as spiritually old. And he has a lot of medical problems. So Tex's laundry list of ailments includes leukemia, epilepsy. He has an incurable lung disease, he has arthritis, he has thyroid disease, and he has an anxiety disorder for which he takes Prozac. Not dog Prozac, actual human Prozac. And because of his various conditions, he takes a lot of medication every day, and he's pretty good about taking tablets. Normally, I just wrap each tablet in a small little square of cheese, and he'll just swallow it right down. But every now and then, he decides he hates cheese. He's never liked cheese. And I'm clearly an idiot for imagining that he ever liked cheese. I mean, what was I thinking? Cheese, really? So just every now and then, I will have to comb through the entire contents of my fridge to try and find some other food that I can hide a tablet in so that he'll take it. So one day, it was early last year, I think, I was doing that. I was trying to find a food that Tex deemed palatable that particular day. And it occurred to me as I was doing that so many people just wouldn't bother. You know, they would look at this dog who was almost 13 at that point, who has many illnesses, who isn't as playful as he once was, who spends a lot of time napping these days. And they would think, ugh, you're a burden. They would think he was a burden, a hassle. They wouldn't recognize him as the treasure that he is, the absolute gift that he is. And they might even surrender a dog like Tex, you know, trade him in for a puppy, for a younger, newer, more interesting model. And as soon as I had that thought, my heart broke a little bit. And I realized that I needed my next book to be about old dogs. I needed to write a book that showcased not only how special senior canines are and how deserving of love and how we owe them safety and security and love and warmth, and we owe them doting in their twilight years. But not only that, I wanted to show also how much senior dogs are still capable of. And there's 15 stories in this book, and they're not just old dogs, although just being an old dog still makes you worthy of love. You know, you don't have to do anything spectacular, but these dogs have. They've all done really incredible things in their old age. So for example, there's the story of Howley, who learned to surf as a senior dog and then became involved in a charity, a surfing charity that teaches young people with disabilities and you know, sort of intellectual and physical disabilities, teaches them how to surf. There's Jonesy, who was an amazing 17-year-old dog, I believe he was when he passed away only a couple of months ago. And he was a Lion's hearing dog. So he was paired with a Melbourne woman called Megan, and he was her ears. She was born deaf, and he helped her navigate the world. He helped her have a good night's sleep, because prior to having Jonesy, she would be terrified of fire breaking out at night and just couldn't sleep. So, I mean, dogs can do things as incredible as help human beings sleep, you know, and if that's not amazing, then I don't know what is. So I'm so pleased to have written this book to hopefully show people what old dogs are capable of, why they're so wonderful, why they shouldn't be discarded in their old age. And, you know, if reading this book encourages one person to go out and adopt a senior, then, you know, I'll consider myself having done the job that I set out to do. Yeah.
Well, I have a dog called Muddy, and he's 10. And after reading your book, I realised that he was a senior. Up until then, I hadn't thought of him as a senior. And I said to my husband, we have to not do such long walks and just be more mindful that he's getting older. So it gave me a deeper appreciation of our old dog. So that was lovely to read about your dog in the introduction of your book.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, actually, because a lot of the people I interviewed whose dogs were 15, 16, there's a dog in this book who was believed to be 30 when she died. And it was only when she was 20 that her owner suddenly realized she was getting on a bit.
Was that Maggie?
Maggie, yes. And I think that's what's so amazing, is because dogs live so much in the present that they're not worried about what hurts or how they're going to feel tomorrow or the fact that they can't run as much as they did a year ago. They don't worry about any of that stuff. And consequently, it's easy for us as their humans to overlook that as well. And yeah, when it hits you, when you suddenly realize it can be a bit of a shock.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I looked at him and like, yeah, you look a bit more grey, you look a bit more old manny now.
Yeah, that's right. But still beautiful, of course.
Yes, yes. So I was really intrigued with how you collected the stories in the book. Like, did you put an ad in the paper or Facebook post out? And then did you get a deluge of stories, and how did you select the ones for your book?
Sure. I get asked that question a lot, and the unsatisfying answer is that it's quite serendipitous. It seems to be, you know how like you never notice other Hondas on the road, for example, until you're driving a Honda yourself, and then you see Hondas everywhere all the time. It's a bit like that with these stories, because each of my dog books has been themed around a different thing. So, for example, the one before Extraordinary Old Dogs is this one, Miracle Nuts. And it's about dogs that weren't expected to survive for one reason or another, but not only survived, went on and thrived and did incredible stuff. So I wasn't aware of ever noticing stories like that until I set out to write that book. And all of a sudden, those kinds of stories were everywhere. And it was the same with Extraordinary Old Dogs. I hadn't ever really paid much attention to stories about senior dogs. All of a sudden, they were everywhere I looked. So part of me does feel like the universe kind of conspires a little bit to deliver these incredible stories. But yes, of course, there are more practical ways that I do it as well. I've worked, I've been a journalist and a professional writer for more than 20 years now, and I've written about dogs a lot. In fact, I used to be the editor of a dogs magazine called Dog's Life. And also I love dogs, and I've been involved in rescue in various ways and that kind of thing. So I do know a lot of people in that kind of dog world and that animal welfare world and the rescue sector. So I certainly put the word out to all my contacts when I start writing a new book, asking them if they know of any stories that might fit the bill. I'm a bit of a prolific social media user, so I definitely post on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those platforms. And friends of friends, you know, people put me in touch with someone they know that has an old dog. So I did get quite a lot of responses to those various call outs for Extraordinary Old Dogs. I wouldn't necessarily say I was deluged. Like, I was able to put most of those stories in the book. The only ones that I didn't choose, well, there were a couple where I reached out to owners and for one reason or another they didn't want to participate, which is totally fine. And then there were a couple of people who contacted me where their dogs were amazing, obviously, but they hadn't quite, or the thing that they'd done wasn't kind of big enough, I suppose, for the book. And I hate to say that because, you know, as I said previously, a dog doesn't have to do anything special to be amazing. All dogs are amazing just because they exist. But obviously for the purposes of the book, I need stories that have a big kind of wow moment. But there were only a couple of those where I had to say, you know, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful story. But I can't include it. But I don't mind that anyway, because I still get to hear the story, and I'm never not interested in hearing about people's dogs.
Yeah, that would be very hard to have to reject some of the stories. I bet you get this question a lot too then, what your favourite dog is, because I could make up my mind between Maggie or Chaser.
Oh, yes.
I just loved those two. I mean, I loved all of them, but them two I really loved. So have you got a favourite dog?
It is a bit like being asked to choose a favourite child. Luckily, I only have one child, so that's fine. But I do have 3 dogs, and I could never pick a favourite. And I mean, Maggie's story is amazing. She was a cattle dog who lived to the age of 30. Chaser was an incredible border collie who could recognize 2,000 different toys by name. She was amazing. I would have to say, I always really enjoy those kind of stories of destiny and fate. So, and I firmly believe that the dog always chooses. They're human. We think we're in control, but we're really not. So probably my favorite story in the book is the story of Susie. So Susie lives with an American family, the Jakainen family, and they just woke up one day at 3 o'clock in the morning and found Susie in their house. And all their doors and windows were locked, and they had no idea how she got into their house. But she was emaciated. She was very wet because there was a storm raging. She had obvious injuries. She was obviously in a bad way. They did subsequently solve the mystery of how she got in, but I won't spoil that for you. You can read the book and hear all about it. But I just love that story because she picked them. And if she had gone into the house next door, she might have been taken to a shelter the following morning, and none of the amazing stuff that's happened to her since would have happened. I mean, they started an Instagram account for her, and she's now got something like 50,000 followers, and people who hear Susie's story have been inspired to go out and adopt senior dogs of their own. So the story of Susie's rescue has been directly responsible for something like 150 other adoptions now. So she just picked the right people. And I just think, fate has to have a hand in a story like that.
Definitely. I'd forgotten about Susie. There were so many memorable dogs in that book. But yeah, it was when they solved the problem of how the dog got in, I thought that was quite beautiful too. That whole
was amazing.
Bit of a bite story there with what happened. I'll give it away, even though I'm itching too. My last question before I hand over to Jacinta is, I was also really interested in the owners of the dogs. And a lot of the owners had really cool stories too. So like Vicky, I've just written myself some notes, but Vicky, she was a well-known dog trainer and trained lots of dogs in to do different things. Yeah. So after you've obviously spoken to lots of people, so do you have one bit of information was passed on to you by one of the dog owners that you have always stuck by or found invaluable?
There's been so many, honestly. What I do find really interesting is, although the books that I write are about dogs, they're not just about dogs. They really are about the human-animal bond and how profound it is and what a truly life-changing impact it can have. I mean, every single person in every one of my 6 dog books has had their life changed irrevocably for the better by a dog. And I suppose, sure, I glean practical tips here and there for, things that I can do with my own dogs. But I think more importantly, what I've learned is you have to be open to that. I wrote in one of my books that dogs have much to teach us, but we have to be open to learning it. So I think that bond and that relationship can be so profound, as if you are willing to take that into your life. So I suppose that's what I've learned, is to be even more open to the power of my relationship with my dogs, as crazy dog lady as that sounds. But I make no apologies, because I am a crazy dog lady and I'm very happy about that. But, a perfect example is how my 3rd dog, Coco, came into my life, because we were very happy with our 2 dogs and we certainly were not looking for a 3rd one. But I happened to find myself at an RSPCA shelter. I wasn't supposed to be there. It was a really convoluted, crazy story as to how I found myself there. But I arrived at the exact same moment as the local dog catcher, who had Coco with him. And I just knew as soon as I looked at her, oh, that's why I'm here. I'm here to get you. I just understood that immediately. And I don't think I necessarily would have had that feeling had I not already, well, I mean, I've had dogs all my life, but had I not already had the bond that I've got with my other two dogs that encouraged me to be open to being chosen by another one.
That's great. Okay, Jacinta, I'll hand over to you and see if we've got any audience questions.
Thanks, Angela. I've got a few questions here for you, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is, how long does it take for you to write a book and to collate all the stories?
That's a really good question. So I write a book a year at the moment, and fingers crossed that will continue. And I am a pretty quick writer. So, for example, my next book, the book that will come out in 2021, is due at the end of April. And I haven't started it yet. So that goes to show, usually I need about 4 months to write a book. Because I have a 6-year-old as well, I work in school terms. So I tend to spend a term doing all my interviews and all my research, and then I spend a term just writing the book. Yeah, but I would also probably caution other authors against working this way, because I'm such a terrible procrastinator, and there is always a fair helping of total panic as a deadline approaches. So probably what I should do is give myself much more time, but I don't seem to be able to learn that lesson.
That's the thing, if it works for you.
Yeah, and I was complaining to my editor at Penguin about how stressed out I get and why can't I do it better, or why can't I be more organized? And she said to me, Laura, this is just your process. Stop fighting it. Just understand this is how you work and go with it. So I'm trying to take that on board a little more.
Yeah, very right. It's everyone's individual process and individual way, and can be completely different for another author then. So along with sort of those sorts of lines with the writing of your books and everything, what are some of the challenges you come across when you're taking other people's stories and writing other people's stories? What's some of the challenges, but also some of the positives of it too?
That's such a good question. And one thing I will say is that I am acutely aware of what an enormous privilege it is to have people trust me to tell their stories. I never ever lose sight of that, especially because all of my books are about pretty dramatic things. So I'm often asking people to talk to me about the worst moments or the worst days or the worst times in their lives. And the fact that again and again people trust me with those stories, it really feels like a huge honor. So I never ever forget that. So I do always, do my absolute level best to be true to them and tell their stories in the way that they deserve. So challenges, I mean, I suppose I just want to always make sure that I'm honoring the relationship that they've had with their dog. So, for example, in this book, there's a story about a woman called Charlene Mead, who was a really accomplished woman. She was a Paralympian, and she had, so many honors and so many accolades and achievements. And then towards the end of her life, her dog rescued her one afternoon after she got stuck in a bit of a sticky situation. So Charlene has since passed away. So I interviewed her daughter for that chapter. And I had included some details in the first draft about the end of Charlene's life and the reasons that she ultimately did pass away. What I always do with these books is I always send the chapters back to the dog owners after I've written them, just so they can go through them and make sure they're happy with everything. Because the last thing I want is for the book to come out and find there's an error in it, or there's something that the owner, didn't want made public or something. So I had sent the chapter back to Charlene's daughter, and she really was quite adamant that she didn't want any of the specifics around her mum's passing included. It was just too raw for her, and also she didn't feel it was necessary in telling the story of her mum's relationship with her dog, which of course I totally understand. So I just took that out. So yeah, the challenge for me is making sure that everyone's happy with what I've written. The positives, of course, are, another challenge is not crying constantly. I'm always crying when I interview people, crying when I'm writing, it's ridiculous. But the positives are when they come back to me and say, I love it, you've captured the story beautifully. People often tell me when the dog has passed away that they love having their story in the book as part of the legacy and those kinds of things. So that is amazing. And yeah, I've become really good friends with a lot of the dog owners that I've written about. So that's really wonderful as well. It's definitely more positives than challenges.
Oh, what a fantastic outcome it sounds like. It was a really positive experience for everyone by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
So I particularly, this is a question coming from me, but when I was reading the book, Arnie's story really touched me, and just everything that he experienced. Yeah,
I missed the
Arnie.
Oh, Arnie. Yes,
yeah. What a beautiful dog, and everything he experienced, and yet he sounded so happy still. But just a question for you on that note then, across might be in Extraordinary Old Dogs, but even across all of your books, is there one particular dog or any dogs that just really stand out to you as that their story touched you?
Oh my goodness. Gosh, all of them. Hang on, I'm going to have to look at my books now. Let's see. I'll show you some of the covers if you like. This was my first one, Extraordinary Old Dogs. Actually, there was two in here that really still stay with me. One was the story of Bonnie, who led her owner, John, to safety from the Black Saturday bushfires down in Victoria in 2009. They were surrounded by fire and, they were going to die. There was no doubt about it. But she found a disused wombat hole somehow amid the smoke and the flames and led John into this hole, and they sheltered there for 6 hours as the fire just roared overhead. And John and I became quite good friends. And this actually often happens as well. When Bonnie passed away, I was one of the first people that he contacted to tell. And that actually happens quite a bit. There's been a couple of dogs in Extraordinary Old Dogs that have passed away since I finished writing it. And their owners got in touch with me kind of the same day or the next day. And again, that's such an honor to, have them understand that it's not just about the story. I genuinely care about their dog. The other story in Incredible Old Dogs, Incredible Dog Journeys, my goodness, I'm getting my own book title mixed up, is the story of Inca. She was missing for 10 years and made her way from the northern beaches of Sydney to the Gold Coast in Queensland before being reunited with her original owner, who had never stopped looking for her and never given up hope that she would return to him. And very sadly, when she returned to him, she had cancer and she didn't live for very much longer, but she was able to pass away in his arms, surrounded by the love she should have had all along. And, that's what when I say the dog chooses you, I think stories like that are just absolute proof of it. So those are definitely two that I'll never forget ever.
Oh, they sound beautiful. Such lovely stories. Now, have you, you sort of touched on it there a little bit, but I've got another question here. Have you ever had the opportunity to meet any of the dogs that you've written about?
Yes, I have several. Ideally, I would meet all of them, even the overseas ones, maybe especially the overseas ones. If I could just gallivant around the world meeting dogs, that'd be amazing. But yeah, I've met several. I don't have a copy of my book, The Rescuers, to hand, but if anyone is familiar with that, the dog on the cover is a pit bull by the name of Clove. And I got to meet her a couple of years ago when I was in New York and take her for a walk in Central Park. And, that was amazing. And in Miracle Mutts, there's a story about a three-legged husky named Dare, who thought he could fly and leapt off a fifth-story balcony and lost a leg. So I met him. He actually, I did a TV appearance to promote that book last year, and Dare came on with me. Frankie, I think she may have retired now, but she was the in-house dog at Bear Cottage, the children's hospice in Manly here in Sydney. So I spent quite a bit of time with her. I used to hang out there and just, watch what she did and the joy that she brought to the kids. And so, yeah, it's always my preference to meet the dogs if I can. And I am fortunate enough to have been able to have a few scritches and boops with a few of them.
Oh, one of the perks of writing the stories, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you mentioned it earlier that you'll be starting your new book soon. You haven't yet, but can you tease anything as to what it may be about? Anything you might know about it already?
Yeah, sure. This one, the working title is A Dog's Best Friend. And it's going to be about dogs that have best friendships with animals of other species. So I really, this time around, wanted to write something super heartwarming. I mean, all my books, I try to make them joyful and uplifting. But certainly with old dogs, there was maybe a little more sadness in this book than there have been in some of my others. And just with the pandemic and the year that we've all had, I just want to put a book out that's pure joy. So that's what the goal for the next one is, which will be around, it'll be out around this time next year.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Sounds excellent. Now, have you got any advice for people who may, even as you mentioned before, you can't put all the stories in a book, but even for people who may just want to reach out and share any of their stories with you about their own dogs? Have you got any advice on how to reach you?
Well, certainly if anybody has a dog who is best friends with an animal of another species, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me via Instagram. That tends to be where I'm lurking most of the time. My Instagram handle is Laura Greaves Author. I also have a Facebook page, which is Laura Greaves Writes Books. And I do have a website, lauragreaves.com, but it's down at the moment. Some nasty people got into it and did some stuff to it, so I'm getting it fixed. But there is a contact form on there once that's back up and running if people would prefer to email. But yeah, certainly messaging via Facebook or Instagram is probably the way to go.
Sounds good. And this is just another question from me personally, but when I was doing a bit of digging, I hadn't realised that you had also written fiction books. So while I'd sort of borrowed a few of your non-fiction books about the other dog stories as well, I think I had the Rescuers one too, but I hadn't realised the fiction. So do you prefer writing fiction or non-fiction?
It's a really hard one. Some days I do and some days I don't. So these are a couple of my novels. This is my first novel, Be My Baby. This is my third novel, 2 Weeks Till Christmas. The one in the middle is called The X Factor, EX Factor. That one's only available currently as an ebook. I find writing fiction a lot easier because there's much less research involved. It just all comes out of my imagination. Having said that, I love research. It's probably my favorite part of the whole writing process. And I think it's probably because my background is in journalism. Research and interviewing is kind of what I started doing, and it's really the foundation of everything I do. At the moment, I'm doing a PhD as well in true crime, and that's all research. So I'm kind of in seventh heaven there. But yeah, fiction is definitely easier. I do prefer, well, prefer is not the right word. I love writing the dog books because I love dogs so much, and I could happily just write these books for the rest of my life. But every now and then I do get a bit of a hankering to write fiction again. So I did recently start a new novel, but I haven't got very far with it yet, just because of all the other things I mentioned. But I certainly intend to write more fiction as well at some point if I get 5 minutes.
Sounds good. And we've touched on a few of the different dogs in your book so far. We mentioned Susie, Arnie, and Maggie as well. Did you want to just tease any more of the stories, any of the other dogs in your book, some of their stories for people who might not have read the book yet?
Sure. Let me have a flick through and see who would be best to talk about.
I quite liked Magnus as well.
Magnus, he's adorable. Yeah, Magnus was a greyhound who lived over in Perth, who greyhounds are really susceptible to a particular type of bone cancer, and very sadly Magnus was diagnosed with it. And after that diagnosis, his owners Kristen and Jason decided that he needed a bucket list. So for the last few weeks of his life, they spent every waking minute trying to give him as many joyful experiences as they possibly could. I mean, he got to go on a police boat, he got to meet a celebrity. What else did he do? He visited a war veteran, he visited an old folks home, he just did so much amazing stuff. And as he was going through all of this and doing all these things, other people were hearing about the story. So not only was it lovely for Magnus, it became lovely for a whole community of people who kind of rallied around him. So that was a beautiful, beautiful story. The other one I really love, you know, talking about how the kind of stories that involve destiny and fate really speak to me. The story of Chloe Bear. So another American dog, she was owned by a little girl named Nicole, and Nicole was heartbroken when her family had to rehome Chloe. She was only 10 at the time. And then I think she was younger than that, 8 or 9, but 10 years later, Nicole decided to adopt a senior dog, and the dog she adopted turned out to be the dog that she had given away, her family had given away in her childhood. And she didn't realize it because obviously the little dog Chloe had aged significantly. She was all grey, she had no teeth. It was only after a couple of days together that Nicole realized, hang on a second, I think you're my Chloe. And then sure enough, they went and got her microchip scanned and it was the same dog, which I just think, you know, again, it comes back to that thing of the dog choosing us. As far as little Chloe Bear was concerned, Nicole was her person and she was going to be with her, and fate worked its magic and made that happen. I think there's a lot of magic involved where dogs are concerned.
There's some beautiful stories in the book, so for sure. So anyone, if you'd like to place a hold on Laura's book, Extraordinary Old Dogs, we'll be getting copies of it through the library soon. So you can either visit your local library, give us a call, or place a hold online, and you can certainly find Laura's other books as well. So also, as we just wrap up, thank you so much for joining us today, Laura. Thank you for the audience as well for joining and watching. Be sure to follow us on Facebook. Also, we've got the Onkaparinga Libraries Eventbrite page where you can find more of our upcoming author talks. We'll also be sending out a survey to everyone who's joined in today, and then that way you can provide any feedback. So thank you again for joining us today, Laura, and speaking with us. It was wonderful hearing all your stories.
Yes, thank you. It was great.
Thanks, I really appreciate it.
Take care and enjoy that warm weather you're having.
Warm.
Bit of a change from us.
Thank you.
And
thank you.